Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this amazing, exciting episode, number 59 of The Hopenning, the place where hope is happening. And today, hope is going to happen with exclamation points. I promise you that. So I'm here with my amazing co-host, Fran. Fran is in High Prairie, Alberta, and she is a veteran teacher. She's been teaching for 35 years, Fran?
34 and
34
almost
years.
35.
Almost 35 years. Wow. You need a medal.
Thanks.
And I am in Calgary, Alberta, and I am a full-time rapid transformational therapy practitioner and a certified hypnotherapist. Fran is also a rapid transformational therapy practitioner, and she does that part-time for now. And we are all about giving hope and bringing the message of hope to you. So Fran will have the honors to introduce our amazing guest today.
It is an honor. Dr. Jody Carrington. Oh, the crowd goes wild. So Jody is a renowned psychologist, sought after for her expertise, energy, and approach to helping people solve their most complex human-centered challenges. Jody focuses much of her work around reconnection, the key to healthy relationships and productive teams. She is a best-selling author. That's the other book. I have the other one at school. And a speaker and leader of Carrington Company. Jody, super funny. Wait till you hear her. And she, and all she has learned in her 20-year career as a psychologist empowers everyone she connects with. Her latest book, Feeling Seen, she dives into what it takes to reconnect in a disconnected world. Jody's message is as simple as it is complex. We are wired to do the hard things, but we were never meant to do any of this alone. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you for having me. Fran and Marina. We were talking even before you started about all the things about hope, and then we were like, whoa, press record.
Yes.
So where were we?
We were at the part. Oops, I'm sorry.
We're all talking at the same time. That's what we do. So
because you're all about storytelling, Jody. You're all about storytelling and how you connect with people through stories. So tell us your story of how you got here. What is your story?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. I grew up in a small town. We're all in Alberta, which is so fantastic today. I grew up in a small town in central Alberta called Viking, Alberta, Canada. And it's home of a couple of things. The Sutter brothers, like there's 7 boys, 6 make the NHL. So hockey's a part of like what I love to coach it and play it. And I still think I'm going to make the NHL. I often attribute, speaking of your almost 35 years as a teacher, I often attribute sort of relationships and the privilege that I had of, having so many positive ones as a kid growing up to the inspiration around becoming a psychologist. And in the beginning of my first book, Kids These Days, I talk about the story of a teacher. And I cannot remember, Fran, you'll appreciate this, I cannot remember a single literacy or numeracy thing that anybody taught me, but I can often remember how people made me feel. And one of my favorite teachers, her name was Holly Nordstrom. She taught me in grade 10, and I have no idea what. Okay, so I go on to get a PhD, but I have no idea what she taught me. But I remember where she was standing and what she was wearing and how she made us feel the day she had to tell us, the 22 of us, that the then captain of our hockey team had been killed. And she doesn't remember this day because I've since asked her this conversation. But I remember thinking, even as a 16-year-old kid, if there's somebody at the helm of times of big distress, we're all going to be okay. And I said to my dad that night, I said, I know what I want to do for the rest of my life. I said, I want to be like Mrs. Nordstrom. And he said, you want to be a teacher? And I was like, no, I don't like children. And it's funny because I say that quite often cheekily, but I much prefer the people who hold them. Because in 20 years of being a child psychologist, I've assessed and treated over 1,000 kids in this country. I've never met a bad kid. I've met a lot of emotionally dysregulated kids. And if the big people aren't okay, the little people don't stand a chance. And so when I started my career, I did my undergrad at the U of A, and I did sort of an externship with the RCMP. So I became a civilian member of the RCMP, our country's national police force, for a couple of years. And I started to learn about organizational stress and trauma and what it looks like when, organizations don't look after their people. And I have a huge love for the people who dedicate their lives to first responding, because I think we do a really poor job in this world of looking after first responders, and we do an even worse job of looking after the people who hold them. And you're only as okay as the people who hold you. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to be a police psychologist. I'm going to become a police officer, maybe, because then I'll get more respect. And then thankfully there was a hiring freeze in the RCMP when I applied to get in, because you can imagine me with a gun. But anyway, I got into grad school at exactly the same time. And so I did my master's and my PhD. And then I did a residency in Nova Scotia with kids. And I learned that we know even less about kids and trauma than we know about adults and trauma. And I did a postdoc in child psychiatry. And for 10 years, the first 10 years of my career, I worked on a locked psychiatric inpatient unit for kids. And at the Alberta Children's Hospital, so not very far from both of you. And those kids and families taught me everything that I didn't learn in grad school, because most of us as teachers, as clinicians, we're all trained in, particularly in the world of rapid intervention. Many of us are trained in this place of let's get a problem and fix it. Solution focused therapy, which means behaviorally, I want to take this and move this forward because you don't like this. I want to move this forward. And it's all based on this idea. When we don't get into the emotional side of things, which both of you are very, very good at, we just want to fix it. We want to fix something that's not going well. And here's the hard part about this. You can't fix something you don't acknowledge. If you don't pay attention to where it lives in the body, the story behind it, the trauma of it all, it becomes very difficult to fix, because you can provide 1,000 solutions. Take deep breaths, journal, do yoga, eat your kale, do all the shit, huh? And it doesn't matter if you're not reconnected here and to your head and your heart, huh? And so much of the ways that I was taught in my PhD was, we really want to fix emotional regulation. We really want to get people to be calm and happy. Okay, that's our job. And we put a high emphasis on it. I mean, my forefathers of psychology worked really hard to try to figure out how we get people to comply. And Watson and Skinner came up with the original theory that we've long outgrown, but we still use in every major institution, which is you make a good choice, I reward you. You don't make a good choice, I punish you. Yeah. And Watson discovered this by shocking a rat. He was like, look what happens when you shock a rat. Son of a gun. It stops the behavior. And then Skinner was like, look what happens when you feed a pigeon colored water. Oh, shoot. It does more of the behavior. And then we decided that we should make that the impetus of every major institution. The institution of education, justice, corporate America, parenting strategies. You make a good choice, I reward you. You don't make a good choice, I punish you, until suddenly you decide you should be kind. And so I kind of thought that was a bit ridiculous. And why wasn't it working with these really, kids that were blowing out of schools and foster homes and group homes? And people were like, we don't know what to do with these children. And they were hitters, kickers, biters. And they would get sent to our locked psychiatric inpatient unit. And what everybody was asking is, what is wrong with them? And when we started asking this question, what happened to you? What is your story? Everything changed. And so I met my husband. We had 3 kids very fast. And then I moved to, because I was having a near breakdown. So my husband, who's a farmer, he said, I know what'll help you. Let's move closer to my mother. So that's how we ended up in Olds, next to his mother, who I adored for all the years that we had her here. And I started a private practice, and I wrote a few books, and they became national bestsellers. And here we are. I'm speaking around the globe about connection and relationship and just what it means to feel seen. And that is really the answer to this disconnected world, because we've never been this disconnected because of proximity to each other, because of the use of technology. The hardest thing we will do is look into the eyes of the people we love. And we've never had so many opportunities not to.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So I would like to know about the whole disconnection thing, and what do you think contributed the most in our lifetime to being so disconnected?
Well, I think what's really interesting about this process is there is sort of, I think, a number of things. And if I were to take it back to the beginning, I mean, emotional regulation becomes the critical piece. The only way we learn how to stay calm in times of distress is proximity to other humans. And if you think about just in 2 generations, the proximity to each other, our accessibility to each other's eyes, each other's faces has decreased significantly. Retrospective data would suggest that our great grandparents looked at their children 72% more of the time than we look at our babies. And if you think about even the square footage of the home that your grandfather lives in, or the square footage of the house in which we raise our babies, you know, at the size of the beds that our grandparents slept in. I mean, my personal husband and I, we've been married for 15 years. We got a king size bed. I don't even know where he is most of the time. And when we're inundated by data all day long, right? Like you can imagine, you teach kids all day long. I, single-handedly save the mental health of children in central Alberta. I coach hockey. I got to pick my kids up tonight. I got to make supper. I got to pack their bags because we're leaving tomorrow. My book is, we got to speak and at the end of the day, I don't want to invest in relationship, which is really, really hard for me to do. You know what I want to do? I want to watch the Netflix. I want to learn how to launder money in the Ozarks. I want to screen through everybody else's bullshit because mine is too heavy. I've just had too much on my head. Not that I don't love my children or my partner, but I don't have much left. And so this disconnect is really perpetuating this mental health crisis because we are not getting filled up. We're neurobiologically wired for connection. You will never automate relationship. But the more opportunities we have to exit from it, we will take them because it is the hardest thing to do then and now. Then we had so much opportunity to look at each other. So I think emotional regulation is a big issue. Proximity is a big issue. I think, if we take it back to the basis of colonization, at one point, somebody decided that one heartbeat was more important than another. I think we still pay a massive price for marginalization and racism. I think we are significantly disconnected around an emotional language. I think women are far more equipped to have an emotional language. And the less proximity we have to each other, the more of an emotional language we're going to need. Highest rate of suicide in this country, in our province, is middle-aged men. Primarily because I don't think they have an emotional language to the degree that is required, because emotions will not kill you, but not talking about them might. And when you're not equipped with the language, not because you don't feel things, right? Gender's a spectrum for me. Everybody feels the same thing. And when you've been given much more opportunity to speak it, to name it, to organize it, as we typically do with women or our girls, those who identify as women, you have a much better shot at organizing your experiences than our boys or those who identify as men do, because the culture is still very expectant on, you're fine. Boys don't cry. Suck it up. And so if I perpetuate that culture, particularly this is what I love about the first responder world, is the culture is embedded in the workplace about that process. It becomes very, very difficult to name those things. And we see rates of PTSD go through the roof because there's no place to acknowledge it.
Yeah. And you talk at the beginning part of the book, you talk about the brain. Can you explain that with your hand? How flipping your lid? Explain flipping your lid, which...
Oh my God, this is a Dan Siegel concept. And I don't remember. So Dan Siegel's a psychiatrist who's written like a number of amazing things, as I'm sure you both know. But I really understood, the importance of relationship and connection and, behavior, and why we put a high emphasis on people who can, use their words and do great things. But I didn't understand the neurobiology behind it. And Siegel was probably the first guy that just made this so simplistic. And he introduced this concept of the lid flip very early in his career. And he basically, encouraged, I just stole this from him, and I will always give credit where credit is due because it makes so much sense to me. But if you put your hand up in front of your face and you put your finger, lay your thumb on your palm, wrap your fingers around your thumb, and you hold that out in front of you, that fist that you've just made with your thumb tucked inside is basically an anatomical hand model of your brain. And it's the same size of the brain that currently sits in your head about. And your arm represents your spinal cord. Your wrist is your brainstem. And it sort of sits in your head like this. If you flip your fingers up, your thumb represents your limbic system. And as humans, we develop from the inside out. The most primitive parts of us are in the internal focus of ourselves. All mammals have this internal primitive emotional section. Fight, flight, or freeze is the strategies we're all born with to regulate emotion. So if you learn nothing else, you still get fight, flight, and freeze on board. What separates humans from most other mammals is we have the prefrontal cortex that wraps around the limbic system. So if you wrap your fingers back around your thumb, That's where everything you've ever learned in your life lives. So like how to dance, how to speak a language, where your family is from, the middle name to your mother-in-law, the PIN number to your bank card, how to speak a language, how to, I tell my husband this, how to judge a heifer, how to, anything, the PIN number, everything you've ever known to be true, how to be kind, how to use empathy. Everything you've ever learned in your life lives there. And Dan Siegel said, I want you to think about that as a lid. When your lid is on, you have access to those things. When you look at your child and you're very proud of them, their lid is on. Okay. When you decided to go on that second date with whoever, their lid was on. Have you ever heard this? Yeah. She's flipped her lid. He's lost his friggin' mind. Yeah. Now, from a biological perspective, there's many times where I need to flip everything that I know to be true out of the way because I'm in danger. If I'm out frolicking in High River and up comes a cougar, I don't want to have access to everything I've ever learned in my life, right? I don't want to be like, shoot, that's a very large cat. I want to flip that out of the way and have access to the protective nature of my brain, which is to fight or flight or, to freeze and keep myself safe. When you bring a baby home from the hospital, what's interesting about this, right, is they have very little skill on board. The only way they really communicate is they cry, they flip their lids, they lose their mind. And the job of big people is to walk them home. Very similar to a quote that a dead guy I love named Ram Dass said. It sits over my shoulder. He said, we are all just here walking each other home. And I love this, you see, because the job of little people or even our employees or our partners is to flip their lid. And so much of us is to drop in and walk them home. And every time we do this for a child, we create a neural pathway that allows them to stay emotionally regulated when we're not there. So 0 to 2, this is a kid's job. How many times they flip their lid in the run of a day? It's ridiculous because there's not a lot up there to keep their lid on. And the more we walk them through it, okay, look at me, sharing is caring. And you get into school, you get a bunch of very regulated educators. Oh my gosh, greatest gift you'll ever give to a kid, because the chaos is necessary to learn the calm. Keeping them calm is not the answer. And this is how most of our IPPs are set up. What are the motivators and triggers to keep you calm? I want to see some work around what happens when you get distressed. That's trauma integrated work. Not that I'm trying to avoid your distress. I want to know what's the plan for when you lose your friggin' mind. And I want a group of people going, come on, Jackson, what do you got today? You going to hit, spit? What's your deal? And here's how we're going to walk you through it, right? Now, do we condone the behavior? Do we allow it? Can you hurt other people? No, don't be ridiculous. This isn't a kumbaya, everything goes. Kids also need to know where the boundaries are, where the limits are, that we can take charge when you be out of control. Not a chance. I got you. Stop. You here. That's necessary for children and in our relationships for us to feel safe. So it's not about, there's anything goes, but it's not if we're going to have a conversation, it's when, because you can't teach a flip lid. It's neurobiologically impossible. Limbic system cannot learn. So the first order of business, which is very different than many of us have been taught, is to get that prefrontal cortex back on first, and then I teach. Okay. If I try to consequence or teach or shame somebody whose lid is flipped, it is so difficult to process that emotion, and it stays stuck in that limbic system. If I can calm you down first, regulate you, look at my eyes, come here, let's get a snack, let's have a drink. And anybody who does this, I remember at the Children's Hospital, there'd be some kid hanging off the light fixture and he's flipped a table and told everybody to F off. And they'd be like, Jody, he's losing his mind. So I would come in and the nurse would often say, like, if you give him a cookie after he has just been, everybody's going to want a cookie, right? You're going to reward the behavior. And I'm like, listen, you need a cookie, first of all. But second, I need to get this baby back home with me before I can teach him. Okay. So if you want to take a break, I got him. So I would come in, and of course, this isn't acceptable. He's just wrecked the computer, ripped the curtains off the thing. Like, everything's a disaster. And the idea, first of all, would be, how am I going to regulate him? And if he has no words, right? If he's grunting, hissing, groaning, you've seen this when kids get really flipped. They do this. If you can't produce language, and you have access to it historically, if you can't produce language, you also can't process it. So my first order of business is to be this. Okay. Oof. Tough one, hey? Shut up. Okay, good. Now we're in business, okay? Because he has access to his prefrontal cortex a little bit now because he's got his language center back on. If he can tell me to F off or call me a name, we got less to work with. And then I'm going to say, what happened? This looks very bad. Somebody didn't listen to you. Somebody didn't understand. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, you know what? She's a cow. Now, if I were to say to him, that's inappropriate. We do not call other teachers here cows. Okay. What's going to happen to his lid? Boom. Now, we shouldn't be referring to my colleagues as cows, despite the fact that I may agree with him in this particular incident. It's not going to be helpful for him to be able to be educated or consequenced in this moment because he doesn't have the access to learn yet, right? He doesn't have, not that he doesn't have the ability, he will once I get him home. So I will say something like, you know what I was thinking? Let's get a drink of water. And he might say, I hate water. Do you have any juice? Now we're in business. Okay. So do we die in the juice hill? Well, I'll tell you, if I need to drive to Calgary to get to Frigga juice, I will. But most of us die on the juice hill. We're like, we didn't tell any, your choice is water or nothing. I'm the boss of you. Okay. But if I don't have juice, I might say, you know what, Jax? I wish I had the juice. I really did. Maybe you and I can find something there together, but I know I have water and I think I can get some ice. Can I get that for you? Fine. The second I can get him to drink, to take a swallow, you can't chew and swallow with a flip lid. It's neurobiologically impossible. And when I get him to take a drink, this happens. Now I can start to teach. Yeah. What happened here? Well, she said if I didn't do my math sheet, I wouldn't get to go to recess. And you know what? Marcus is going to destroy my fort. Oh, I bet that is not. Marcus was going to take your fort down. So I told her I suck at math. And she said, don't say suck, but I do suck. So she was kind of, she didn't hear you. She wasn't listening. Right. And then what happened? And then it's interesting because the cortex is back on, and then you tend to find the goodness in these children, in anybody. But in this way, they're like, I don't know what, I didn't mean it, Jody. Like I just did this, and like maybe the consequences, I like repaint the whole school. Because when we're regulated, we have access to grief and remorse and shame, like all of those emotions come flooding back in. But when people say to me, this kid has no empathy, this kid has no access to kindness, it's because they're perpetually flipped. And if you live at home in a high necessary place to sort of be flipped, like multiple generations of abuse, neglect, and trauma, if there's nobody there to sort of keep you regulated outside of this process, it becomes very difficult to step into an education system and be ready. Right. So much of the work we do is the walking in all of these processes. And we can't do if we're flipped too, because you can imagine what happens with two flipped lids. I can be the best educator, the best mom on the planet. And when I flip my lid, it's a disaster. I wrote Kids These Days, best-selling book for teachers and parents. If you've seen me, particularly yesterday across Iron Mills, if you see me with my own personal children, you wouldn't buy the book. I was chasing Olivia, who's my 10-year-old. I was trying to buy this kid a bathing suit, and she was so disrespectful. She was like, I don't like that. Mom, you don't even have a style. That is, I'm not wearing that. I'm not wearing that. I was like, okay, you know what? If you can't be respectful. And then her brother, who shouldn't have piped up, said, oh my God, Olivia, you're so ungrateful. So she shoves him in the middle of this child store. Okay. And I'm mad. So I grab her arm and I'm like, don't you speak to anybody like that. What is wrong with you? That's what I said to her in the middle of this child store. Now, people know who I am in Across Iron Mills. Okay. People have read my book. This is 5 times yesterday. People said, oh, hello, Dr. Carrington. Here I am chasing my 10-year-old around the thing. I said to my husband, get her and get her in the truck. She is losing her mind. And so Erin is literally, she's running around the store going, no. I just said, you know what, Erin? You go. Livy and I are going to sort this out. Oh my gosh, you guys, I can't even tell you. When we are regulated, we're phenomenal parents and teachers. And when we're dysregulated, we lose access to the best parts of ourselves. And I have never met a bad parent. I've met a lot of people who get overwhelmed and exhausted and disconnected from the best parts of themselves. I've never met a bad teacher. I've never met a bad therapist. I've never met, people when they get emotionally dysregulated and don't understand the importance of sort of regulating back into things. That's where we lose access to the best parts of ourselves. Not necessarily our abilities, but we lose access to them.
Jody, you don't even have to watch Netflix. You just have to watch you. It's super, because it's like, Jody, did you watch me like lately? Have you been spying on me? I mean, the emotional dysregulation, it's just everywhere, right?
Oh.
It's like, oh my Lord, you wrote the book Kids These Days, but you should write Kids These Days, the sequel. Right? Ever since the pandemic, I just find the pandemic really threw a tornado into all of the regulation that we were working so hard with, right? Like, have you noticed that in your practice as well?
Well, here's the interesting thing about the three components to the most dysregulated amongst us. If I think about, apprehending a kid, or, being on a locked inpatient unit, or a kid blown out of a classroom, there's three things on board: uncertainty, fear, and no end in sight. Now think about the three components of a global pandemic: uncertainty, fear, and no end in sight. So for 3 years as a globe, we've been in a heightened state. And that's exhausting. And so people ask me all the time, is there an effect of the pandemic? Yep. Domestic violence and child maltreatment has never been this high, despite the fact that we've never had this much access in this country to resources and research and funding. We are killing each other at higher rates from emotional illness than from physical illness for the first time in history. And in this province, in this country, in the last weekend, we saw 2 teenagers, right, physically attack their family's units, at the expense of losing, 2 of our, Edmonton Police Service officers, 3 people, I think, lost their lives in Ontario. This is
in Halifax today as well.
Oh, and the issue is, right, this is an emotional dysregulation. This is a mental health crisis. And CAMH has done this beautiful, sort of initiative around, we are stepping into a global mental health crisis because we've never been this disconnected. And it's heart-wrenching to understand this, but I have to tell you, at the same time, I've never had this much hope for humanity. Primarily because, you want to know why? The bar is so low. Mm-hmm. You want to make a difference in your community, you just got to buy somebody Tim Hortons. You give somebody a compliment, a wave. You get out of the very egocentric way of operating, and you change to this place of how powerful we can be in this moment. We can sing, we give the kid with the hoodie a compliment. We step into our colleagues and bring the coffee, make the cookies, do the things. All we want, anybody, regardless of age, race, religion, and socioeconomic status, gender identity, is to be seen, to be acknowledged. And I write about this in Feeling Seen. One of my favorite hockey coaches, you'll know him in Calgary, says this: you should see how fast I can get a kid to skate when I know the name of his dog.
Interesting.
Isn't that fun? We would really do a lot for each other when we feel acknowledged. And in fact, it's a bit contagious when somebody comes up to you and gives you a compliment, about your teaching or your own children. If they say, "Fran, you were the best. I don't know if you remember me, but 20 years ago, you taught me in whatever, and I just wanted to tell you, you not only changed my life, you saved it. Remember that one day when you taught us this lesson," right? When somebody has that conversation with you genuinely, what happens is you leave there filled up and you're like, I got another 20 years in me. That's good. Might be a bit aggressive, but it's often very little to do with financial, rewards, which is always a good motivator in our society. But we really downplay the idea of feeling seen, of connect. We will never automate relationship. And the more now that we work online and we spend time outside of the office and we can teach online, and we, spent 2 years, those 2 years, being disconnected from children, what we will see is that generation of kids will struggle very, very much, in addition to the fact that they have a lot of phone, social media opportunities, which take them away from actually having to have physical, hard conversations with each other. We lose our ability to notice the social nuances. Okay. So I often say this when I'm working with organizations: at the very least, I want your cameras on. At the very least, I want you to have in-person meetings. If you can't get your people back to work, you need to be doing a hybrid model as soon as humanly possible, because you will never replicate the physiological changes that happen over an email, over a text message, right? We get closer when you turn your camera on and I can see your eyes and we can sort of engage in this process. But we would be different women if we were in the same room doing this interview, right? Just from a neurobiological perspective, right? But this affords us to be able to do this, because relatively speaking, given your schedules and mine, we wouldn't be able to actually get to the same room, do the thing. You know what I mean? I met with somebody today from New Zealand, and we did, a bit of an interview. And I was like, I'm so thankful for technological advances, but technology isn't the issue. It's how we use it that becomes the problem.
I want to come back to the pandemic, because it was in the last few days I saw an article that I can't remember which news outlet published that said that it's been determined in Canada that the pandemic had no or little effect on people's mental health. And I went like, excuse me? So I don't know if you've seen that.
No, I didn't. And I think, here's the thing. I think we're hopeful that's the case. And I think if I want to garner data to support any of my hypothesis, that's not peer reviewed, that's not really relative. I mean, I can find a story anywhere. I can make a story out of anybody's experience, right? Like this guy walking down the street. Hey, do you feel better now? Yes, I'm an introvert. I really enjoyed it. My mental health has never been better. Oh my God. Pandemic didn't affect anybody. But we have never seen this rate of burnout. We have never seen this rate of domestic violence and child maltreatment. So if you, and I'm not saying that the pandemic is a direct cause of all of those things. I think it rapidly perpetuated the experience of disconnect faster than if we had not experienced that. Now, there were some benefits that came out of the pandemic. This idea of being able to slow down and take the pressure off of having to be everywhere, do everything, those first maybe even 4 to 5 months were beautiful for many family systems. And then the emotional dysregulation set in. And so it's the idea of, how do we have to do everything with our kids? Do they need to be in hockey and basketball and basket weaving and piano and, 54,000 things? Their brains can't handle those things. But we are also very pressured as parents to give them way better than anything we ever had. So I want my kid to play, well, he wants to play lacrosse. This one wants to curl. This one wants to go into baseball. Okay, so let's do all of that. And then we got to get to the hockey game. And then we got to, okay, fine. Everybody, let's go swimming. Because I also don't want our kids to just spend the remainder of their days on their iPads, which seems to happen when we just stay home together. So we're really caught in this interesting scriptless place of parenting, raising this next generation, of how do we stay connected to them in the traditional ways that we know how. How do we evolve in staying connected to them in the ways that they know how, right? How do we get on the TikTok with them? How do we get on the Snapchat? This is a perpetual problem. If you think about Footloose as a movie, oh my goodness, it's the rock and roll that's wrecking the children. Nope, we're going to ban the music, versus if you would just show up at the dance and attempt to, get them to teach you how to do the jive, the kids are, oh my God, Fran's the coolest mom ever. She's jiving, So there I'm doing the giddy or whatever. I can't remember what it's called the other day, some kind of TikTok dance with me children. And I'm 47 trying to shuffle through the thing. And my kids think it's the funniest thing on the planet. I'm like, if you post that anywhere, you will lose your life. But I feel like so much of this is there's not a script for this. And what we tend to do is do what our parents did. Right. Mm-hmm. And our parents are also very influential in us doing the things. I remember always, my mom saying to me, I would never do that with. I can't believe Libby's like this. I would never let her get away with that. And I was like, okay, listen, I feel like we're also parenting in completely different times. And it's so difficult for us to be able to use the same script. Now, are some fundamental things true? Yes, kids need to be acknowledged. The light up. Toni Morrison talks about this, and she wrote The Bluest Eye. She said, the only thing a kid needs is somebody to light up around them. And I think that's perpetually been always true. The champion, right? The biggest sort of benefit. And you think about the kids that need it the most. How many times do people go, yeah, right? Especially around the ones with the hoodie up, the hair down, the ones that are like always walking around like this. Nobody is happy to see them, right? Versus the ones that are emotionally regulated and dressed well, eyes are up, they smell good, they look good. We do a lot more. Mm-hmm. And the ones who need it the most are the hardest to give it to.
So before we turned the recording on, you had a very captivating story that you told about you met with the Métis tribe today in BC.
Yeah, the Métis Association.
Yes. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I thought that was absolutely amazing.
Well, I think that, for me as a settler, in my position of privilege, I didn't even know that I have it, which is the definition of privilege. And I got a PhD in this country, and I not one time learned about the residential school system. And I've served in professions like, for example, in child and family services in our province. At one point recently, 2 years ago, 72% of all kids in care were Indigenous, and Indigenous children make up 10% of the population. Mm-hmm. And I never, not one time, asked this question. Well, how come that is? How come we regulate? How come we relegate some people to reserves in this province? How come? What is that? What is this about? I never asked that question. Huh? There was just a very racist part of operating in this world based on what I've been taught, which is drive through reserve fast. Hopenning was the name of the reserve that was in between my house and my school, which is now Masquachese. And the question would always be, just go fast. Don't. And I would say, in the last 5 years, as I spoke across this country, I've sat through many land acknowledgements, and I've heard people say so many times, how many times do we have to do this? It's history, despite the fact that the last residential school closed in 1996. I was in university, and there's lots of conversation around we've already apologized. And the truth is that in the 2015 Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report, there's 94 calls to action, and not one of them is about apologies. There is lots of requests for acknowledgement, which basically means I need you to hold space, bear witness. There's no ask for a fix, because you can't fix a cultural genocide. When you acknowledge another human being and you talk about what you notice, what you see in this place, when we are in this opportunity to be able to say, teach me all the things that we missed, that my forefathers, my foremothers missed. How can I do better? Teach my children to do better. Because the basis of colonization is somebody decided that one heartbeat mattered more than the other, despite the fact that race is a social construct and we all started in exactly the same place. Every single person in this province in this moment started by feeling the exact same thing first, the heartbeat of our mamas. And that bump, 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 bump is the basis of emotional regulation in the human race. And all of us understand the importance of emotional regulation. It's in our bones. If nobody has shown you how to do this, if you have survived multiple generations of abuse, neglect, and trauma, you will not be able to give it away. And our job, I think, as settlers is to listen, to learn, to understand, and then take action and repeat that cycle again and again and again, making sure we're getting it right, checking, are we acknowledging, do we got it wrong? Because part of the mistake is we just assume this is what we need to do to fix it. Let's apologize. Let's bring the Pope over. Okay. Sorry for the cultural genocide. Here's $2 billion. Despite the fact that there's babies buried in this province that we have not even addressed. And you can't get to reconciliation before you get to the truth. And the truth is still very much untold in this country. So how do we continue to ask questions and wonder and understand? I mean, as a settler here, I have started the unlearning process that is this big. And our ability to remain open to this, I think, is the only ask. Right? Our ability to sink in again and again and again. And so today, it's such an honor to be asked by the BC Métis Association to be able to talk to them about trauma. And my understanding, from my position of, white privilege, the understanding of trauma and benevolent experiences. And it was just, it was just such an honor to be able to sort of use this perspective to say, holy, have we ever gotten it wrong for such a long period of time? Have we ever been, so blind? That our commitment, my commitment, is to listen and listen and listen and learn, and help the next generation unlearn. And I think that's where hope lives, that if we really can be in this place of acknowledging our privilege and how it keeps us so biased in the way that we think about things. And, people say this to me, or, I've asked before, so are you still racist? Absolutely. The biases that I hold are in my bones. And I hate that about myself. But my first thought is something that comes very directly to me. When I speak on reserve, when I've never even thought about the fact that as a white-skinned person, I get treated very differently when I walk into Crouch Iron Mills, because I've never had to think about that privilege before. Am I biased in that way? Absolutely. Right? I hate that about myself. And, I've spoke to my Jesse Lipscomb, who is a Black activist in this province, who I really adore. He's taught me a lot about racism and the experience of white privilege. And, he just, it breaks his heart every time I talk about that, right? The fact that we can be friends, and I can, I'm only just beginning to be aware of my biases. And I say this to him all the time. I hate that they're there, Jess. I really do. I wish they weren't. And I'm going to do everything in my power in this lifetime to not make them prominent in my life. And one of the things that I love the most is the conversations that we can have around our kitchen table with our children that would have never been safe enough as, just one generation, right? About gender identity and how you identify. And, we did this work with our kids. There was a couple of Black teachers who put together this anti-racist package for white parents. And so we sat down and had a conversation with our kids about racism. And one of the prompts was, your kids have to ask you, Mom and Dad, are you racist? And so both Aaron and I said, yes. Have you ever done anything that would be harmful to another race based on, and Aaron and I said, yeah. And the kids were so mortified. They were like, how could you? And I was like, that's a great question. Let's talk about it. Right? You can't address what you don't acknowledge. And I think we don't want to be sad. We don't want to be mean. We don't want to be racist. And so when we make these declarations, like I'm not racist, I'm not this, and maybe you aren't, which is fantastic. But I will tell you from my perspective, it is very difficult in one generation to unlearn a very biased way of operating, a very sexist way of operating. The conversations around gender identity would not have been an option at our kitchen table. And now it's interesting, with our children, even as I watch my farmer husband, when my kids sort of say like, well, this is her pronouns, or, they refer to themselves like this, that he wouldn't stay engaged in that conversation and say things like, tell me more, wanting to learn, understanding that process is such a jump from what his father would have presented as, right? And so I have so much hope. I have so much hope in this capacity to evolve in a way that we finally understand our history, that we're brave enough to sink into the truth. And that doesn't mean that we cannot do better and be better, right?
You talked in the book about if the adult is dysregulated, there's no way that we can help our children to regulate. So you and Olivia the other day at the swimming suit store, how do adults regulate? How, like, we were taught by our parents, right? And if our parents were pretty emotionally dysregulated, how do we teach ourselves? Like you go over it really well in the book. So I want you to talk about that, like about getting in touch with who we are down here.
Yeah, there's always, obviously there's always hope in this process, right? And so much of this stuff, happens to me around, kids and trauma. And like, if you've experienced a lot of trauma, you haven't had corrective experiences, can you do better, be better? Oh my gosh, absolutely. Otherwise I wouldn't be doing what I do. And I think that so much about this is really understanding this process, being very careful about who you surround yourself with. It's about understanding sort of the fundamental experiences of finding people who have emotional languages, whether that's a therapist or a best friend, somebody who can really reconnect the head and the heart. How do we start to use much more emotional language? How do we understand that as women primarily? This isn't necessarily our responsibility, but we're really good at leading in this way. So let's step in to heads of organizations and boards and, leading not like a man in a woman's body, but leading like a woman from an emotional language, leading like a human, because when people are acknowledged, they rise. And I think, I'm at the best parts of myself when I'm really surrounded by, when I'm sitting with the winners, the conversation is different. When I am really connected to my breath, dropping the shoulders, wiggling the toes, being back in that regulated system myself. And when I really keep in mind the bigger picture, because I think in the minutia, we get lost so much in, lack of resources, lack of funding, overwhelming, what's the point? When really at the end of the day, we can do the best we can with what we got on every given day, and it's enough, right? This idea of we're just walking each other home is really the thing I got to get back to when I feel the most overwhelmed.
Kindness part of it, right? The
Yeah.
kindness. So Jody, when I listened to you before COVID in Grimshaw, and I don't even know what year that would have been, maybe 2018. I think your first book had just come out. And you talked about giving a kid a cookie. And I'm like, might work. What the heck? So this child in my room who many teachers had problems with, and I think you were at the fall PD day, right? The fall one. And so I'm like, hey, why not? This might work. So he, as typical, because that's the kind, that's what he did. He dysregulated. It was like, okay, buddy, you're going to have to work out in the hallway for now until, might be a little bit quieter for you. So he was like, really, he took his paper out there, and I had made these cookies, like the chocolate chip cookies, right? And back in the day, we were allowed to have a fridge in our room. So I got the cookie, took it out. I think I had juice in there too, or maybe some milk. And it was incredible because he thought I was there to give him heck, right? Because, that's what teachers do. You just act it out in the classroom. And I just kind of sat with him a little bit, gave him a cookie and gave him something to drink. And I went back to my own classroom to deal with the other kids, right? It was amazing. And the whole relationship changed. At that point, the relationship changed. And I was like, how can that be that I didn't know this? We do it with, right? We do it with our own kids. I mean, it's like we'll give our own kid a cookie or give them some milk or whatever, and they could get calmed down. But I had never thought of it, and it became what I did, right?
I love that.
I know. Such a small thing. And even to this day, he is the one with the hoodie. He's the one that couldn't, he loved wearing the mask and the hoodie because you only have to see out of this much, right?
Yeah,
but
you can hide.
You can hide so easy, but he's the one, it'll be like every other teacher is like, Fran, what did you do? You're the child whisperer. And it's like, cookie.
And you're like, I was just nice to him. You should try it.
Well, I just say cookies. If you got cookies, he will walk walk on water for you. I know it was brilliant, but just so easy. So easy.
Yes.
That's amazing. So I would love to know more about your books and where people can get hold of them.
Yeah, so we're all over Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all the independent bookstores. You can take a look there first. Those are our favorite. And everything, I think they're up on our shop. So drjodycarrington.com. We do lots of good stuff. We're doing a workshop on divorce and hope and all of those things coming up. So I really love to make this platform that we're creating just a safe place to land, for everybody so that they can get back to the best parts of themselves. That's kind of the whole key, the whole key to feeling seen.
And can you remind us of the titles of your books?
Yeah, kids these days and teachers these days, both primarily for parents and teachers, and then Feeling Seen, which just came out in January, which is for everybody.
That's the one that
It
Fran held up
really
earlier.
is.
Yeah.
It's for everybody. And it's like I was telling Jody before, there, it's the same thing. I think before we started, that it should be like required reading in an early teaching, for the early part of your degree. If you're becoming a teacher, it is incredible. It talks about everything. Everything is in there.
Aw, thank you
Yeah.
so much. It was such a joy to write. So thank you, and thank you for having me.
We're so thrilled that you were here, and thank you so much for educating us and teaching us so much, and for your beautiful energy.
Aw, thank you, thank
Absolutely.
you, thank you.
Yes.
May
Yes.
Thank
hope
you.
prevail.
That's right. And thank you so much for watching us today, listening. And if you like us, you know where to subscribe. And thank you, Fran. And we will see you next time.